Let's move on to the day's top business news now with our top business presenter, Brian Quinn. We're going to start with some reassurance from the US's top central banker that he's ready to step in if the country's trade wars hit the economy too hard, Brian.
Top of the morning to you, Stuart. U.S. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell signaling Tuesday that the central bank is prepared to cut interest rates. Powell, speaking at a conference in Chicago, mentioned trade negotiations in particular as the Trump administration remains mired in a trade war with China while threatening new tariffs on Mexico. The Fed has so far resisted recent calls by Trump to lower rates, which are currently at 2.25% to 2.5%. Recent statements by central bank officials, though, acknowledging that their hopes for a speedy resolution to those trade conflicts don't appear likely. Here's Powell.
Know how or when these issues will be resolved. We are closely monitoring the implications of these developments for the U.S. economic outlook, and, as always, we will act as appropriate to sustain the expansion with a strong labor market and inflation near our symmetric 2% objective.
Well, that apparent confirmation of investors' expectation for a coming rate cut sent Wall Street surging in Tuesday's session. Asian indexes following that trend Wednesday for the most part. The Nikkei in Tokyo closing up 1.8% as shares in industrial robotics giant Fanuc jumped nearly 3%. Chinese indexes mixed. Hong Kong's Hang Seng up 0.2%. The Shanghai Composite just below the flat line as reports show Chinese stock markets saw their largest outflow of foreign capital ever in April and May. The Kospi in Seoul finishing the day up just 0.1%. Europe in the green at the open as well. London's FTSE 100 opening up 0.4%. CAC 40 here in Paris and the Frankfurt DAX just over the flat line at the open. They have since dipped into the red, however. Next, U.S. lawmakers plan to bring in the leaders of top tech firms to testify in a major antitrust probe. Meanwhile, two federal agencies are also gearing up for a similar investigation of Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google. That new regulatory push threatening a major shakeup for some of the world's most valuable companies. Nick Rushworth reports.
Congress is concerned about the power now in the hands of several of the world's most valuable companies. Lawmakers want oversight of Amazon, Facebook, Google, and Apple in what is called a top-to-bottom review of market power. Apple CEO Tim Cook disagrees that the company should be broken up, a demand by some U.S. politicians. He said, "I think we should be scrutinized, but I don't think anybody reasonable is going to come to the conclusion that Apple's a monopoly." Cook spoke just as two developers sued Apple over its App Store practices. He and other tech bosses will likely appear before a House Judiciary Committee. Two agencies, meanwhile, the Federal Trade Commission and the Department of Justice, have probes planned of the Big Four. One law professor argues the solution is to issue clear anti-competitive rules for big tech.
There ought to be a rule that if you're a dominant platform, you have to, and you're also hosting yourself on your platform, you have to apply neutral principles, that you should not be able to give yourself all sorts of privileges and demote your rivals, let alone sabotage them.
Any clear rules will take time, possibly years, but the pressure is mounting amid a backlash against the companies among politicians and consumers.
And finally, for business, a new report out Wednesday says cruise ships run by Carnival Corporation release 10 times more carcinogenic emissions than all of Europe's cars. NGO Transport and Environment studied the 203 cruise ships sailing European waters in 2017. Their report shows those ships pumped out 62 kilotons of sulfur dioxide. That's along with 10 megatons of CO2. Carnival Line's responsible for about half that. Barcelona, Mallorca, and Venice, some of the worst affected areas. Ships generally use some of the heaviest, least refined fuel on the market, which is not taxed, making it cheaper for ships to generate electricity in port just by running their engines. The new report comes just days after Carnival agreed to pay a $20 million penalty in the U.S. for continuing to dump plastic, fuel, and sewage into the ocean, along with falsifying incident records. We do have some new sulfur dioxide regulations coming into effect in the EU in 2020, Stuart, but they are still expected to beat out the car emissions even after they take effect.
Wow, it's incredible, those figures there. I had no idea it was that large. Thank you very much, Brian. Brian Quinn with Business on France 24.